But today, I want to start off our time together, and I want to resolve some mystery together. Isn't it good to get some answers to some mystery? There's some mysterious things that we experience in life. There's some things that's like, if I could just figure that out, if I just knew what was going on, if I just understood that, that would be great. And so I want to start off, and if you've never thought of these things, well, I'm going to give you some things to think about now, and you're going to feel like, what? Why did he even bring that up? I never thought of that. But there's a couple things I'd like for us to try and figure out together today. The first is this: how is it that two people can come together and they can stand in a church, or they can stand in a courthouse, they can stand in a field, in a barn, wherever it is, two people who fell in love and they want to come together and they want to make the ultimate commitment to each other till death do us part. I'm in this, you're in this, let's do this in front of all our family and friends. How is it that those two people on that day can commit to loving each other? And maybe a year later, maybe 5 years later, maybe 10 years later, however long later, how is it, it's a little weird, a little mysterious, how is it they could love each other so much and then they could hate each other more than any other person in the world? That's a little mysterious. Come on, think about that. That's a little weird. Maybe that's part of your story. Like, just don't bring up his name. You could talk about the guy, the dictator, and that guy that we read about in the news. And it's like we hear about those things, and we're kind of like, oh, that's too bad. That's a tragedy. But if you bring up her name, there's going to be a problem. But how is that? It's a little weird. There's a little mystery to that. One day we're saying we love each other more than any other person, and then however long later, it's, well, I can't stand you, and I don't want to see. There's a little mystery to that. Here's another thing we're going to try to figure out today. This phrase, domestic violence. Think about how weird that phrase is. Think about how mysterious. Domestic, like we live together. Domestic, like I love you and you love me, and we wake up next to each other, and I'll even let you use my coffee mug because I love you so much. And we have a dog and we have a cat, and there might be kids. Domestic, we are domestic. Violence. I want to hurt you. I want to cause you harm. If you're going to hurt someone that deserves it, right? You probably shouldn't hurt anybody. I didn't say that. We'll take that out of the podcast. Don't hurt people. But think about that. Domestic violence. It's kind of weird. There's some mystery around that. There's something about that. And one more thing we're going to try to figure out together today. If you know two people who maybe they're going through a season and a process in their relationship where it's falling apart, right? They're married, they've been together, but you're just watching this thing's disintegrating, it's deteriorating, it's falling down, they're strained. And you know, like they're getting ready to separate, to divorce. We've tried everything, we've done everything, and so now we're just going to leave each other. If you were comfortable enough with those people and you could have conversation with them and say to him, hey, I know this is over. Could you see yourself in maybe a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? Could you see yourself falling in love with someone else again? Could you see yourself entering into another relationship? And they might look at you and say, yeah, I mean, I guess I could see that. It's not out of the question. I'm not saying I don't want to be with someone else. I'm going to fall in love again. Okay. And maybe you go to her and say, I know what he did to you. I know it's over. This is done. Could you see yourself in a few years maybe falling in love again? Someone new comes along. Would you do that? Yeah, I think I could do that. And maybe you might look at them and say, oh, hold on. If you could see yourself falling in love with other people at some point, then why don't you just fall in love with each other again? It's a whole lot cheaper. I mean, why not just save the money, save the stuff, and don't split it? Why can't you do that? And they would look at you and think you're crazy, right? Come on. They would look at you and say, well, you don't understand. And they would say something like, it's not that simple. And they would be right. And you know they're right. And I know they're right, because it's not that simple. Because relationships are not that simple. But these are some mysterious and weird things that surround our relationships. If this is your first time here, or if you've been tracking with us the past couple weeks, we're in a series called Happily Ever After. And we started a couple weeks ago by asking the question, hey, what if happily ever after wasn't just for fairy tales? What if it just wasn't for Sleeping Beauty and the princesses of Disney movies? What if we could reach happily ever after? What would that look like? And we start off by saying, even if I stood up here and took all of our time together and convinced you it can't be done, there's no chance, your relationship's going to fail, it's not going to work, look at your experience, look at the data, look at culture, you can't reach it. You would push against me so hard, you might even throw something at me and say, oh, I don't know about that. There's something in me that wants that. You didn't enter into a relationship hoping it would end. And if you're single, you're not hoping to get into something that will just have an expiration date on it. So you want to reach happily ever after. The problem is, it's not that simple. It's not that easy. And we talked about how falling in love requires a pulse. Some of you guys, you fell in love with people you never met before. They were just in the screen, and you were like, man, that's her and our baby's names. And you just went all out, and it was a boy band, and you had the picture in the locker. You never even met them. You fell in love. Because falling in love requires a pulse, but staying in love requires a plan. And we've been looking at what would that mean for us to stay in love. And culture says, well, if you don't feel it, just choose again. You chose wrong. There's billions of fish in the sea. Find the right one. Choose again. And we heard the words of Jesus, and he said, love each other. Love each other. Love as in it's not just a noun that you fall into and you feel some days if she's doing what she said and dinner's ready and he took out the garbage and so I feel love. No, love, verb, do. Love each other. Jesus said that. And Jesus kind of elevated and he said, love each other the way I love you. He gave us a new example. He didn't say the way your parents did. They were great, and your grandparents and everyone in your family stayed together. You have a lot of good examples, but love the way I love you. And last week was hard. Last week, if you weren't here, I mean, it was good for you not to be here because it was hard. It was hard because we looked at the words of Paul, and he said, this is what it means to love. You've got to submit to one another. You've got to treat that person like they're more important than you. You've got to be interested in her garden, even though you don't like vegetables and you don't want a garden. You have to be interested because that's what love looks like. And we discovered that that's exactly what Jesus did when he came to this world. Jesus humbled himself. He took on the form of a servant and he served us and made our greatest interest his greatest interest. Our greatest interest is we need a savior. We need someone to rescue us from us. And Jesus showed up and said, I'll do that because he loved you. But here's the problem. We've been talking for a while. I've been talking for a while this morning, and let's just say it. It's not that simple. Awesome. So words on a page tells me what to do, and we spend some time together, but it's not that simple. Today I want to ask why. Why is it not that simple to do those things? Why, if you're in a relationship, is it not that simple? Now, it would be that simple if you came into the relationship with a heart full of good things. Right? If you came into the relationship and man, your experiences growing up, dad was at every game and mom was at every recital and you saw them holding hands. In fact, they cuddled too much and you're like, calm down a little bit, guys. And you saw they loved each other. And there was problems. There was financial issues and headaches and hiccups, but you knew you were loved and they loved you and all of your teachers supported you. And your friends never lied to you. They never betrayed you. I mean, you had nothing in there. Your heart was just filled with great experiences. See, then it would be simple. You enter the relationship and suddenly all you're going to do is just show that person, well, this is what I've seen. My heart's filled with good stuff. I mean, I've got joy and I felt appreciated and I felt accepted. I'm just going to give you some of that because it was great. Anyone here, that's your story? It's not my story. I could say, I don't even need to know you personally to know your story probably doesn't look like that. Man, at some point in your story relationally, there were some betrayals. Dad didn't come to every game. In fact, dad wasn't around. In fact, dad, you didn't even know if dad was coming home at night. And mom, I mean, she had her own issues she was going through, and there might have been drugs involved, and there might have been alcohol involved, and there was some abuse involved for you. And your teachers were supposed to support you, but they put you down. And your parents were very, very focused on your brother because your brother had issues and you were the golden child. And so they didn't really pay attention to you because they had to deal with what was going on over there. Your sister, let's not talk about your sister. She got a lot of attention. And you felt betrayal and you got picked on and you felt that. And that's part of your story. And that's part of my story. And that's in our stories. We feel that. So when we try to enter into relationships and say, I want to reach happily ever after, well, what's going on? It's not that simple. I can't just show you what I have. And that's when we start to justify why things don't work out for us. And now we have tissues under the chairs in here, so we could take out the tissues right now and we could just make each other cry. And we could share our stories and we can have a pretty good cry fest on a Sunday morning. We can go around the room and we could really, I don't want to belittle, but we can have a pity party, right? You know what a pity party is. And we could talk about everything that's been done to us, and this is why I don't trust him, and this is why I can't be with her, and this is what's going on because of that. And we can have a good pity party, but the problem with that is that that's not going to get you to happily ever after. If you want happily ever after with another person, you can't just complain about all the stuff that you've been exposed to and say, well, this is why, because look what happened. Yes, you have your story, and I have my story. See, what we're going to do today is we want to figure out what's in there. What's in there? Because whatever's in there is going to come out to the people around you. And I brought two friends with me. I brought guests with me today that are going to help me illustrate what's going on. I want you to say hi to my friends. This is Mr. Mugg and this is Mrs. Mugg. Can you say hi to the Muggs? The Muggs are with us today. Some of you are like, that's the guest? Yeah, that's the guest. They got a lot to teach us. And let me tell you their story. See, Mr. and Mrs. Mugg, they met each other after college. And they fell in love with each other. And Mr. Mugg, he looked at her and said, wow, she's good. I mean, look at her. She's a knockout, right? She's beautiful. And he loved her. And Mrs. Mugg said, wow, you got a future. You got a car. You got a degree. I mean, this is great. And when they first got together, they were so careful. And they had a couple things go on, but they were careful around each other because they loved each other. They didn't want to hurt each other. This was new. This was a feeling. Mr. and Mrs. Mugg loved each other. So they did what maybe you've done. They said, let's get married. We love each other. We fell in love. It feels good. Let's get married. And about a month into the relationship, Mr. and Mrs. Mugg, they have a little thing and stuff comes out. Stuff, right? You can wear, stuff comes out. They have a bump and Mr. Mugg looks at Mrs. Mugg and says, whoa, I didn't know you had that in you. And Mrs. Mugg, I didn't know you had anger issues. Well, I didn't have anger issues until you bumped me. And they keep having conflict after conflict. And it's just happening. And so Mrs. Mugg, she goes off to see her sister and she says, I didn't know he was like that. And she talks about him. And Mr. Mugg goes off to, oh, we don't know where guys go. So Mr. Mugg, they didn't go anywhere. Mr. Mugg just kind of went by himself. And he just sat there and said, she makes me so mad. And she gets on my nerves. And Mrs. Mugg said, well, if he would just, then I wouldn't. And you see, don't miss this. You're going to want to take notes. This is deep. See, Mrs. Mugg believes that the red beads come out of her because Mr. Mugg bumps her. And Mr. Mugg thinks, well, the reason I get angry is because you keep bumping. If you would just stop bumping, this stuff wouldn't come out. Now, this is good. Don't see the blue beads come out of Mr. Mugg. You know why? Because they're in there. And the red beads, write this down. You're going to forget. The red beads come out of Mrs. Mugg because that's what's in there. But Mrs. Mugg is convinced, well, the reason why I act like that is because you bumped me. And Mr. Mugg is, well, I wouldn't get angry if you didn't bump me. But the real reason the stuff comes out, it's not because you got bumped. It's because it's in there. And there's nothing like close romantic relationships to cause bumps that will show you what's in there. And to answer the question we start off with, the mystery, that's why two people that make the ultimate commitment to each other can end up hating each other so much, because there's nothing like a till death do us part that can bring out the best and the worst in that person. But it's not because they bumped you. It's because that's what's in there. And that's what we're going to talk about today. See, culture would tell us, and what we would think would be a good strategy then is, well, I need to find someone who's not going to bump me. Let's look out. Let's figure this out. But let me just say, you're in this space and maybe you're single and you have no plans to be in a relationship. You've been there and it's just not. This isn't just for marriages. You know this. This is horizontal. This is your work friends. And they bump you. And your cousin that you wish wouldn't come to the party, but you have to invite him because he's your cousin. And he bumps you. See, we all have this. But while we would say, well, let's figure out what's going on outside of us, I want you to see that what God wants us to do, and what we're going to discover today, is instead of looking outside, let's look inside. Let's figure out what's in there. What can we do with what's in there, because it's going to come out. And if you want to reach happily ever after, you need a strategy to deal with what's in there. So we're going to look at what God has to say. We're going to read one verse together today. It's Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Mrs. Mugg, you got your stuff all over my Bible. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 is what we're going to read. We're going to have the scripture up here on the screen, but if you have a Bible, I encourage you bring it and turn there. If you don't own a Bible, before you leave, grab a Bible from one of these baskets. It's a gift for you. You can keep reading Proverbs. But I'm going to ask you to stand with me right now. It's something we do in this space. We stand and we read the text together. And if you're not comfortable reading out loud, just listen to the people. We have people who will read it nice and loud for you. And if you want to read it like you need it, because we need this. All right, we've got stuff. Let's read this together. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. You may be seated. Let's close in prayer. That's a lot. Now, let me tell you, before we get into what we just read, let me tell you about who wrote what we just read. This is written by a king, and his name was Solomon. Solomon, when he existed in the world, and this is thousands of years ago, when he existed, he was known as the wisest person to live. He was brilliant. He was smart. And he wrote a lot of stuff. In fact, we have a lot of the things that he wrote. This is just one sentence, but we have some of his books. And he wrote about money. He wrote about budgeting and financing and why you should save and why you should have contingency plans and how important it is. And he wrote about being a king because he was one. And he wrote about cattle and he wrote about work ethic. And he wrote about relationships. In fact, one of his books is all about romance and sex and relationships. And another book that we have, he was kind of at the end of his life and he looked at everything he had done and he wrote about his life and what it looked like from an older perspective. I say that because he wrote a lot of stuff. He wrote a lot. And the sentence we just read, what were the first 3 words that we read there? Above all else. Let me translate that for you. This is important. This matters a lot. Yeah, but Solomon, you wrote about romance, isn't that? Yeah, that's good. But Solomon, you wrote about saving and budgeting. Yes, that's important too. You wrote about being a king. You wrote about that. Yep, that's good. But above all else, you've got to get this. This matters most. This is important. Solomon would look at us and say, I know I wrote a lot, but there's this one sentence I wrote at some point, and it's an above all else sentence. It's a this matters. It's a you've got to get this. It's a don't tune out here. Above all else, what, Solomon? Above all else, what? Guard your heart. Guard your heart. Now, when Solomon says heart, he's not talking about your blood pumping muscles. So calm down. We don't need a strategy to figure that out. Things guarded by skeleton bones and all that. It's taken care of for you. When Solomon says guard your heart, heart means that place where you have emotions, where you have feelings, where you have desires, where you have your list of wants, you have passions. It's who you are. It's the core of your being. It's that seat of emotions. And Solomon says what's most important for you to understand out of everything I could write and tell you about, what's most important is that you guard your heart. Don't just look outside of you. You need to figure out what's going on the inside of you. You need to guard it. You need a strategy. Because why? Well, we just saw what's inside of you is going to come out of you. And so you need a strategy to guard your heart. Now, let's just think. When you hear that phrase, guard your heart, what comes to your mind? What do you have in place in your life? We all have rhythms to our lives. We're all moving in certain motions. We have a daily routine. What is your strategy for guarding your heart? Now, maybe you hear that and you say, I never thought about that. In fact, that kind of sounds like some psychobabble. I didn't know that was in the Bible. I mean, we're getting in touch with our feelings here. What did I sign up for? I just want a coffee and a bagel. What is this? Touch my feelings and guard my heart? Maybe that's where you land. In fact, if you were to turn back and have the opportunity to ask me or someone around you, hey, what does he mean by guard your heart? If you have to ask what guard your heart is, chances are you're probably not doing it, right? Because if we have to ask, well, what in the world does guard your heart mean, then we're probably not good at it, and we might not even be doing it. But here's the problem. Solomon just said it's the most important thing we could do. So here's the most important thing you could do. What is it? How do I do it? I never thought about that. As today, we're gonna talk about a strategy for you to guard your heart, because I'll say this, I don't think this is our normal leaning. We don't naturally pay attention to what's going on in here, especially in the context of relationships. Now, if I made you feel a little bad for the past minute, I'm going to make you feel good for the next couple minutes, because there is something you're very good at when it comes to relationships. There's something all of us get real good at. I mean, we could do this, and if we took out pen and paper, we could write this stuff down. You're good at this. I'm good at this. We may not be good at knowing what's going on in our mug, but we definitely know what's going on in hers. Come on, you know, if you were to sit down and I said, hey, I want you to write down, what does your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, what does that person do that you wish they wouldn't? Oh, pastor, now do you have 5 days? We can talk, because I know exactly what he said he would do, and he still hasn't done it. And she promised she'd stop burning it, but I eat Taco Bell. I mean, it's just, you have your list, you have what you want to feel, you have what you want to experience, and your whole list is completely dependent on what they do or don't do. Well, I would feel loved, and I would feel pretty, and I would feel respected, and I would feel accomplished and appreciated if he would just start coming home on time, taking out the garbage, taking responsibility. If she would stay on budget, if she would clean, if she would work. You have your list of what you want to experience and feel. And that's not wrong. I want to feel things in my relationship. Been married 8 years now. I want to feel things. There's a list that I have. That's not the wrong part. You have feelings that you want to experience. We're going to talk about feelings and what to do with them. The scary and unsafe part, if you're trying to reach happily ever after, is you've attached your list of what you want to feel to what they do. See, you're so good at monitoring their behavior and what they do and don't do and the promises they keep and don't keep. And you're just thinking, well, I would feel a lot better if you would just do it. In fact, the problem is when Mr. and Mrs. Mugg first met each other, he did feel a certain way because of what she did. And that was normal. The relationship starts off with love being a noun. And so when she wrote him that note and left him that note, he felt like the king of the world when he opened up his lunchbox and there was a note there that said, I love you. And now he's thinking, well, you used to write me notes, and if you still would, then I would feel a certain way. But that's because they never got a strategy to guard their heart. It's because we talked about in week 1, when love started out as a noun and it pulled the relationship along, if you never realize that noun needs to become a verb and you need to start doing when you don't really feel like it, well, then that's why you have a list of what you want to feel and experience, but you've built it around what your partner does, and it's not about what's going on outside of you. Now, don't miss this. The way the person that you love treats you is absolutely important. It matters the way they treat you, and the way that they treat you and what they do, yeah, that will play into how you feel. But we're good at taking care of that. I don't have to take the next 14 minutes to tell you how to look at what your partner is doing and your spouse. You know how to do that. The part that we need to look at this morning is what's going on in here. Come on, what am I doing when I get bumped and stuff comes out? Because above all else, you need to guard your heart. And he says at the end of that, above all else, guard your heart for everything you do comes from it. Everything you do comes from what's in here. Jesus talked about this too. In fact, Jesus said if the heart's messed up, the rest is going to be messed up. Jesus said you can see what kind of person the person is by what they do, because what they do, what they say, how they act, it shows what's going on here. Jesus made the heart the central part of our lives. So this isn't something new, and you've seen this. You're good at seeing that people have jacked up hearts around you. Come on, that's why when your friends are fighting, first of all, you feel great because you're like, well, finally, honey, we're not fighting, but they are, right? And you get a little proudness, and maybe they come and they tell you this is what's going on, and Jerry says, something to the effect of, this is what she did. And you hear what he did in response, and to their face, you're just like, yeah, that sounds all right. I could see it. And then you get home, and you're like, I think Jerry has issues. I think they're going through some problems here, because what she did was like a 4, and what he did, it was like a 10, and I'm not sure where those other 6 came from. The reaction to what was going on. See, you can see it in other people. You can see that there's an issue. The problem is we're not really good at looking in here, and that's why Solomon drives this home and why Jesus built on it and said, you've got to pay attention to what's going in you. Here's why. What's in you is going to come out of you regardless of who is with you. What's in you is going to come out of you regardless of who's with you. That's why you can get a new wife, new husband, new boyfriend, new girlfriend, new friends, a new job. You can change neighborhoods. And you could look at all these people and say, I don't get how they're still getting on my nerves. I don't, this is like the 5th girlfriend and she still can't get it. And I still get angry and I still lose my temper because we want to fix what's going on out there. But what's in you is going to come out of you. It doesn't matter who's with you. And that's why you need to grasp this. And that's why you need a strategy to guard your heart. Especially if you're in a romantic relationship, because if you want happily ever after, you need to pay attention to what's going on here. I know he said he wouldn't, he didn't. I know she promised and she still hasn't. But what you need to start looking at is what's going on in here, because bumps are going to happen and stuff is going to come out. So what do we do with the stuff that's coming out? So if you don't have a strategy, I'm going to recommend one to you. You don't have to do this. This is what I've been doing, and I'm telling you, it's not easy. I've living this out, and it's difficult. But this is what I think we should do. You've heard the phrase stop and think before you speak. You've heard that, stop and think before you speak. So I want to build off of that today. I would suggest that one of the first things we need to do when we feel something, when there's a feeling in us and she bumped me and now I feel something, is you need to stop and think about what you feel and call it what it is. Give what you feel a name. Now, guys, we have to work at this. It's just the reality. We don't have a big vocabulary when we get hurt. We are frustrated or angry, right? That's pretty much our go-to, right? How do you feel right now? I feel frustrated. That's it? I think I'm a little angry too. So you're frustrated and angry? Yeah, I'm just frustrated and I'm angry. Leave me alone. Right? That's kind of our two negative emotions. We've got the other feelings. I feel great. I feel happy. I feel like I'm filled with ice cream. It's good. But when it comes to the negative, I'm frustrated. I'm angry. Now, ladies, you get this a little more, not because you're emotional, but because you're in tune with your emotions. In fact, guys, I'll admit it for us, we're probably a little more emotional because we're afraid to say what it is. Because we don't want to look like, oh, really, you're lonely? We don't want to say it. So I want us to expand our vocabulary today. And I'll tell you why after I give you some words that we could say. So you got bumped and you feel something. All right, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. What else? Maybe you feel unappreciated. And ladies, you can grab these words too. Maybe you feel lonely. Maybe you feel ugly. Maybe you feel old. Let's do a scenario. You know, every time you talk about my brother and the things he's able to do and the trips that he could take and the house he has, it's not that I don't like my brother. It's just when you talk about it, I think I feel like a failure. I think I don't feel as good as him when you talk about it. That's a little different. You know, I think I feel picked on. When you use me as a joke and an example, I think I feel picked on. You know, let's do this. It's not that I don't like your sister. I love your sister. It's just when your sister comes around and she gets to wear the dresses that she gets to wear, I don't not like your sister. I think because she looks good in it and I don't, I think I'm jealous. I think that's what, it's not that I don't like your sister. I think I'm jealous. That's a little different. Now, why am I spending time on that? Because when you will spend time thinking about the feeling that's inside of you and process what you are feeling, there's two things that are happening. First, by giving that thing an actual name and not just leaving it as I don't know what I feel or I feel frustrated or I feel angry, you are allowing that thing to be powerful in your life. Because now that thing controls you and that thing can drive you because you don't even know what it is. So you have no idea why when you get bumped, you always lose it and flip your lid or withdraw and stop talking to people because you haven't had time to think about it. So that thing is going to control you and drive you until you look at it and say, you know what, I feel like a failure. And the second reason why this is important is because if you won't process what's going on in you, you are never going to think that you have anything wrong with you. And that's going to stop you from what we're going to talk about next. That's going to stop you from connecting with Jesus. Because if you only think that the reason a blue bead comes out is because she bumps you, you're never going to acknowledge that there's something in here that needs changing. There's something in you that we got to do something with it. So you need to spend time thinking about, okay, I feel this. I feel this. Because it loses its power and it allows you to say, okay, this is a me bead problem. This needs work in here. And then what do we do with that bead? Now, this next part is uniquely Christian, if I could use that. So if you're in this space right now and you would never say you're a Christian, you're just exploring faith, this is new to you, you're checking it out, I want you to know that this is for people who have said, I understand Jesus as my Savior, and I need him to be my rescuer. Now, here's the cool part. If you never said that and you don't believe that today, you can. This is just something you need to just, okay, well, they got it and I don't. No, all of us are invited into this. So this might either be something you do, Christians, or something you're invited to do if you're checking this out. And this is what we do with that bead. So we figure out, okay, this bead here is me feeling like a failure. I told myself what it is. Now I'm going to tell Jesus what it is. Now I'm going to talk to Jesus about what this bead is. And the reason why that matters is because Jesus alone is able to take your bead from you and replace it with what he has in him. Jesus alone is able to take that feeling of a failure and unappreciated, and I don't amount up to anything, and I don't ever get things right, and I feel left out and picked on and lonely and ugly and whatever it is. Jesus is able to take that from you, and because he is a Savior, he is able to rescue you from that. And I can't tell you the amount of times recently I've had to go to Jesus and say, Jesus, here's my bead. Feel like I'm not cut out to be a father. Feel like I'm not cut out to be a husband. I feel like I'm getting this pastor thing wrong. I mean, there's a lot going on here. And Jesus is able to say, I'll take that and I will give you what I have said about you. And one of my scriptures I've been reading a lot is found in John chapter 1, where John says, and to all who believed in Jesus, they were given the right to be called the sons of God. Can I tell you how many times I have to remind myself that you are not defined by a blue bead of failure, but you are defined by being a son of God, not because you're good. No. You've got a lot of beads in there we got to deal with, Keith. We'll get to those. It's not because of what you've done. It's because of what Jesus has done. And that is the gospel. And so this morning, as you're hearing that, you're saying, I love to give my beads away. You can. Jesus is ready to take those beads from you and replace them with what he has, why he came to this world. I must say it again. If you want to know more, grab that connection card so we can talk about what that looks like in your life. So you're going to talk to yourself. It's a little weird. Don't do it out loud. Just think about it. Don't on the train. You are a failure, Keith. Who are you? And you stand next to someone who is Keith. That might be bad if their name's Keith. Don't do it. But talk to yourself about it. Talk to you. Talk to Jesus. And now, don't miss this. When it's appropriate, I'm going to go ahead and say when we leave here in a couple minutes, not on the car ride home from church. No, not today. Watch football. Maybe the Giants will do something. Don't today. When it's appropriate, you talk to that person about what you feel. When it's appropriate. Let me show you what this looks like with these guys here. So Mr. Mugg has spent his time thinking about it, and he comes home. Mrs. Mugg, when you say the things you say, when you find out I'm going to be home late, it makes me feel unappreciated. Now let's pause there. When Mr. Mugg tells Mrs. Mugg, when you say this or when you do this, it makes me feel this, he is not attacking her for that. He has feelings, and he is letting her know what he feels. This is information giving. This isn't blaming. Now, it can be if that's the route you're going to take with it, but we're going to trust these guys listen to a sermon for 20 minutes, and they know how to talk to each other. So when you say that, when you do that, it makes me feel something. If Mrs. Mugg says, well, what in the world do you think? And she gets insecure and defensive, you know whose bead problem that is? That's her bead problem. She needs to deal with the insecurity and defensiveness. See, this is what they do, because they went to church on October 22nd. They come home, and when you say that, when you talk about how I come home late, it makes me feel unappreciated. You know what Mrs. Mugg's going to say? I'm so glad you told me. And then don't miss this. This is probably the hardest part. Now watch what she does. Did you see that? Did that go by too fast? Let's practice that together. So Mr. Mugg comes home, Mrs. Mugg comes home and says, when you do that and you say that and you said you would and you don't, I feel this way. I'm so glad you told me. Nothing. Nothing after that. Not, well, you shouldn't feel that way, and that's ridiculous, and just grow up and get over it, and this is who you married, and we said that. We don't need to say that. You know why? When healthy people hear that something they're doing is hurting the person that they want to reach happily ever after with, you know what they do? They stop. They stop. When healthy people decide, I want to reach happily ever after with you, and you tell me that when you don't take out the garbage, it makes you feel annoyed, then I don't say, well, I came home after work all day and I had a rough day and now you want me to take out the garbage? No, I stop. I'm so glad you told me. I'm so glad you told me. And Pastor, taking hat off, Keith, married for 8 years, talking to you, it's not easy. Had to do it. Had to do it a lot this week. I'm so glad you told me. I'm so glad you told me. In fact, Amy and I were practicing that yesterday, and we were driving out to pumpkin picking and driving home. We were sharing with how we feel. And I'm so glad you told me. We want it to be a part of our rhythm, but it's not normal. Because what's normal is to say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. And this is who you married, and you knew this, and grow up, and that's ridiculous, and it's not a big deal, and just change. But healthy people, when they have a strategy to guard their heart and look at the beads that are coming out of them, they identify it, name it, make it lose its power, bring it to Jesus, say, Jesus, I'm trusting you with this. I know who I am because of you, and now I'm going to talk to her about it. I'm going to talk to him about it. And when they talk to you, it's, I'm so glad you told me. I'm so glad you told. It's a little different, but I think that's how we get to happily ever after. I think that's a strategy that Solomon, saying above all else, guard your heart, he was talking about. That's not going to be easy. You're going to have challenges. Don't do it again in the car. You're going to have challenges this week. You're going to want to fight back. You're going to want to talk. You want to go at it. Say, this is why, and defend yourself. If you're defensive and insecure, that's a you bead problem. You got to figure that out. But this is not a solution to all problems. This is not. I'm not saying this is a solution, but this is definitely a strategy to reach happily ever after. This is definitely different to start acknowledging what's going on in here. And all of us get to do this, whether you're in a romantic relationship or not. You go to work tomorrow and you get bumped again, and they screw up your order again at Starbucks and you get bumped. What comes out of you? How do you feel? Well, think about it. Talk to Jesus about it and let that barista know, when you keep screwing up my coffee, this is how I feel. They weren't here. They may not say, I'm glad you told me, but you might get a free drink, so that's great. But But this is something different. Now, this is what's cool about this space. If today you're visiting and you're exploring faith, I want you to know that in this space, this is what we want to use here. Because you're going to get bumped by people. Don't think you came to church and no one's going to bump you. People are going to bump you here. Someone took your spot and you're like, you kidding me? I got to drive around a building, right? You came in here and it's like, I always sit there. Why are they sitting there? Person's worshiping, slaps you in the face. I don't know what's going to happen. In fact, today, and if you keep coming, I can make this promise to you. I'm going to bump you. I will bump you from up here. I might have bumped you today. Right now, we're already arguing. You've already got me hit by a bus in your head, right? Like that guy has no idea what he's talking about. So we're going to bump each other and stuff's going to come out. But how cool is it in a safe space where we can talk about what's coming out of us? We can identify it and bring it to Jesus. It's a little different. Next week, we're finishing up Happily Ever After. So don't miss next week. It's the final week of this. And we're going to keep moving towards Happily Ever After in our relationships. Let me pray with you. Good God, we thank you for this time and space. We thank you that you care so much about our relationships, that what you have told us through men like Solomon and Paul and your son Jesus, it applies. It's meant so that our relationships are healthy with you, with the people around us. And I pray this week that we would grab onto this, that we would talk to ourselves, that we would talk to your son Jesus, and we would talk to the people we are in relationship with, and we would see these beads, these problems, these feelings navigated, dealt with, changed. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Amen.